My name is Cora Hayes. I'm 38 years old, and for the last decade, my life has been woven into the fabric of Finch & Gable, a brand strategy firm nestled in the heart of Port Blossom. Our city isn't a concrete jungle of sharp angles and frantic energy, it's a place of misty mornings, where the scent of pine and saltwater hangs in the air, and the gentle curve of the bay holds the city like a quiet promise. I built my career here, not with aggression, but with patience. I was the firm's whisperer, the one they sent in to handle the legacy brands companies that measured their histories in generations, not fiscal quarters. I didn't just create campaigns for them, I listened to their stories, unearthed their values, and helped them find their voice in a world that had grown loud and forgetful. My work was my art, my sanctuary, and I had given it everything. The scent of antiseptic was the first thing to cut through the morphine's soft, cottony haze. It was a clean, sharp smell that meant I was safe, but not home. I blinked, and the blurred shapes of the hospital room slowly swam into focus. A pale green curtain, a metal stand dripping clear fluid into my arm, the gentle rise and fall of a blanket over the bed next to mine. My husband, Nathan, was asleep in the visitor's chair, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, his hand resting on the edge of my bed. Seeing him there, a sentinel in the quiet chaos of recovery, sent a wave of gratitude through me so profound it almost hurt. The surgery had been sudden, an emergency appendectomy that had ripped me from a Tuesday morning meeting and deposited me here, in this quiet room at St. Jude's. The last thing I remembered before the anesthesia took hold was emailing my boss, Simon Blackwood, to let him know I'd be offline for a few days. "Focus on getting well," he'd replied. "We'll manage." My phone lay on the bedside table, its dark screen a small void in the dim light. My fingers felt clumsy as I reached for it, wanting to text Nathan's sister to let her know I was awake. But as the screen lit up, my breath caught in my throat. There was a message, not from family, but from Simon. It had been sent an hour ago. "Your recent unpredictability is a liability we can no longer afford. Your employment with Finch & Gable is terminated, effective immediately. HR will be in touch regarding your final effects." The words didn't feel real. They were cold, sterile, and utterly alien, like a language I'd never learned. Unpredictability. He was talking about my appendix bursting. A liability. 10 years of my life, of late nights and cancelled vacations, of pouring my soul into my work, reduced to a line on a balance sheet that had just tipped into the red. I read the message again, and then a third time, my mind refusing to connect the man who had called my work visionary just last week with the author of this brutal, cowardly dismissal. A low, gentle cough came from the bed beside me. The man there shifted, propping himself up on an elbow. "Bad news, I take it?" he asked. His voice was soft, with a pleasant, gravelly texture, like stones worn smooth by a river. I couldn't find my own voice. I just nodded, turning the phone slightly so the screen faced away from me, as if to hide the shame of it. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his tone one of simple, uncomplicated empathy. "There's no good time for bad news, but this seems a particularly cruel one." He was older than me, perhaps in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that were a startlingly clear blue, even in the weak light. They were kind eyes, but they held a sharp, assessing intelligence that made me feel he saw more than just a woman in a hospital gown. When the nurse had settled him in earlier, I'd briefly seen the name on his chart, Edward Monroe. The name tickled a memory, a headline from an industry journal I'd skimmed months ago, but the fog in my brain wouldn't let it surface. "I was just fired," I heard myself whisper. The words felt like shards of glass in my throat. "By text. While I'm here." A flicker of something disbelief, then a deep, quiet anger crossed his face. He was silent for a long moment, not offering platitudes or easy comforts. He simply absorbed the cruelty of it. "That," he said finally, his voice carefully measured, "is not the act of a leader. That is the act of a coward." His validation was a strange balm. It didn't fix anything, but it made me feel seen. I finally managed a small, watery smile. Thank you for saying that. He gave a slight nod, his gaze thoughtful. May I ask where you worked? A brand strategy firm, I said, the words feeling like a eulogy. Finch and Gable. At the name, his eyebrows rose just a fraction. And in that tiny movement, the memory clicked into place. Edward Munro. Founder and chairman of the Sterling Advisory Group. They were our most respected competitor. They didn't compete on price or aggression, but on reputation. They were the firm Finch and Gable secretly aspired to be thoughtful, principled, and fiercely protective of their clients and their people. Simon spoke of them with a mixture of envy and scorn, dismissing their approach as old-fashioned while simultaneously trying to poach their clients. And here was their patriarch, lying in the bed next to me, a witness to my humiliation at the hands of his rival. A hot flush of embarrassment crept up my neck. The universe, it seemed, had a truly wicked sense of humor. I lay back against my pillows, my body aching from the surgery, my spirit aching from a wound far deeper. Simon hadn't just fired me. He had chosen the moment of my greatest physical vulnerability to deliver a mortal blow to my professional identity. He had waited until I was down, truly down, to make sure I couldn't fight back. The message wasn't just a termination, it was an act of profound disrespect, designed to shatter my confidence and leave me too broken to be a threat. Edward must have sensed the storm of thoughts raging inside me. What you built there, he said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence. The relationships, the trust. A text message can't erase that. A man like your boss probably thinks of people as assets on a spreadsheet. He doesn't understand that what you truly create can't be owned. It can only be earned. His words resonated with a truth I had always known but had never applied to myself. I had spent a decade earning trust for Finch and Gable, believing my loyalty to the firm was the same as loyalty to my clients and my own integrity. Now I saw the flaw in that equation. The firm was just a vessel. And its captain, Simon, had just thrown me overboard in the middle of a storm. But Edward was right. The trust wasn't with Finch and Gable. It was with me. It lived in the late-night phone calls with anxious CEOs, in the handwritten thank you notes from marketing directors, in the quiet understanding I shared with clients who had become more like partners over the years. Simon hadn't terminated those relationships. He had only severed his own connection to them. I looked over at Edward Munro, this stranger who had shown me more decency in 10 minutes than my boss of 10 years had in his final message. A new feeling began to displace the shame, not anger, not yet, but a cold, clear resolve. Simon thought he had ended my story. He had no idea he had just written the first sentence of a new chapter. You're right, I said, my voice steadier now. He doesn't understand. Edward's gaze held mine, and in his eyes, I saw not pity, but recognition. He saw a builder, not a victim. At that moment, lying in the sterile quiet of St. Jude's, I realized this wasn't just an ending. It was an intersection. A door had been slammed in my face, but a window had just been nudged open in the most improbable room imaginable. The next morning, the world felt sharper, the pain in my side a dull, constant reminder of my body's betrayal, a pale echo of my spirits. Nathan had gone home to shower and fetch me some things, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the quiet presence of Edward Munro. He was sitting up in bed, a leather-bound notebook resting on his lap, a silver pen moving gracefully across the page. He didn't look like a patient, he looked like a scholar in repose. Sleep any better? He asked, without looking up. Not much, I admitted, my voice still rough. It's hard to rest when you're mentally rewriting the last 10 years of your life. He capped his pen and turned his thoughtful gaze on me. Don't rewrite it, he said gently. Just read it differently. Tell me, Cora, what do you believe is the most valuable thing you gave your clients at Finch and Gable? The question was direct, but not intrusive. It was an invitation to see past the injury. I thought for a moment. Clarity, I said. In a noisy world, I helped them find the quiet truth of who they were. And I gave them the confidence to speak it. A slow smile touched his lips. Exactly. You weren't selling them a service. You were acting as their custodian. A custodian of their story, their identity. That kind of trust isn't transferable. It's personal. He paused, letting the words settle between us. A man who fires his best custodian in a moment of crisis doesn't understand the value of what he's been protecting. And I suspect his clients will soon feel a draft, now that the door has been left unguarded. A flicker of something warm and hopeful ignited in my chest. He wasn't just offering comfort, he was offering perspective. He was giving me back my own narrative. I'm going to be direct, Cora, because I believe life is too short for anything else, a fact of which this current predicament is a fine reminder, he continued, his tone shifting from philosophical to practical. Sterling Advisory has been trying for years to build the kind of heritage brand practice you created. We have the resources, the reputation, but we've lacked the architect. Someone with the unique combination of patience, insight, and integrity to do that delicate work. My heart began to beat a little faster. I knew where this was going, but it felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. I am not offering you a job out of pity, or as some grand strategic move against a rival, he said, his blue eyes unwavering. I am extending an invitation. An invitation to come and build something on a foundation that will not crumble beneath you. A place where custodianship is understood and valued above all else. When you are well, and only when you are well, I would like you to come and talk with my team. Not as a prospective employee, but as a potential partner. Partner. The word hung in the air, shimmering with a weight and a respect I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. At Finch and Gable, I was a senior director, a high performer, a rainmaker. But I was always, fundamentally, an employee, subject to the whims and insecurities of one man. What Edward was offering was a seat at the table. Tears pricked my eyes, but for the first time in 24 hours, they weren't tears of humiliation or grief. They were tears of overwhelming relief. I don't know what to say. Say nothing now, he said with a kind smile. Just heal. That is your only job for the time being. The rest will wait. Later that day, when Nathan returned, his arms full of books and a soft blanket from home, I told him everything. He listened intently, his expression shifting from rage on my behalf to a quiet, dawning awe. Cora, he said, taking my hand. For years, I've watched that place take pieces of you. You'd come home exhausted, carrying the weight of Simon's moods, his impossible demands. You called it loyalty, but I always thought it looked more like a cage. He squeezed my fingers. Maybe your appendix didn't betray you. Maybe it saved you. His words struck me with the force of revelation. All this time, I'd seen my dedication as a virtue. But Nathan was right. It had become a cage, one whose bars were forged from my own sense of obligation. Simon hadn't just fired me, he had, in his callousness, handed me the key. That night, as the hospital quieted into its rhythmic symphony of beeps and hushed footsteps, I made a list on the back of a napkin from my dinner tray. It wasn't a list of grievances or plans for revenge. It was a list of names. The CEO of a centuries-old textile mill who still wrote his letters by hand. The third-generation winemaker who worried about her family's legacy. The head of a philanthropic foundation who trusted my guidance implicitly. These weren't accounts. They were relationships. They were the stories I was a custodian of. And as I wrote, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not abandon them. Edward was discharged the next morning. Before he left, a nurse helping him with his coat, he paused by my bed. He didn't say much, just placed a simple, elegant card on my bedside table. It held only a name, a number, and a handwritten note at the bottom, for when you're ready. No sooner. Heal well, Cora. As I watched him walk away, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal complexities and the inevitable ugliness of Simon's reaction. But for the first time, it felt like my own. A week later, I walked out of St. Jude's and into the crisp autumn air of Port Blossom. The incision in my side was a tender, healing line, a physical map of my breaking point. But my mind was clear, my purpose sharp. At home, sitting at my own kitchen table with a cup of tea, the scent of rain-soaked earth drifting in through the open window, I picked up the phone and dialed the number on Edward Monroe's card. I was ready. The offices of the Sterling Advisory Group were nothing like the sleek, impersonal glass tower of Finch and Gable. Located in a beautifully restored brick building in the city's historic district, the space felt more like a library or a university common room than a corporate headquarters. The walls were lined with books, the floors were warm, polished wood, and the air was filled with the low hum of focused, collaborative work. There was no tension, no sense of frantic competition. It felt like a place built for thinking. Edward greeted me not in a boardroom, but in his own office, a sun-drenched room overlooking a small, manicured garden. We talked for over an hour, and he barely mentioned Finch and Gable. Instead, he asked me about my philosophy, my process, the clients I cared most about. He listened as if my answers were the most important thing he would hear all day. Then he introduced me to Camila, their general counsel. She was a sharp, composed woman with a reassuring smile. "Our first priority is to ensure you operate with complete integrity," she explained, her voice calm and clear. "You will bring nothing with you from your former employer, no files, no contact lists, no proprietary data. You will work only from your own memory and publicly available information. And we will not be making the first move. You will make a simple, professional announcement about your new position. The people who value your custodianship will find you. Our role is to be ready to welcome them, ethically and seamlessly, when they do." It was a strategy built on confidence, not aggression. It was about creating a gravitational pull, not launching a raid. It felt right. It felt like me. The offer they presented was more than generous. It wasn't just the title partner and director of narrative strategy or the compensation. It was the structure. It gave me autonomy, resources, and a team of my own to build. It was a blueprint for a future, not just a job. I signed the contract that afternoon, my hand steady. The following Monday, I posted a quiet, carefully worded announcement on my professional networking profile. "After 10 wonderful years at Finch and Gable, I am thrilled to begin a new chapter. I am honored to be joining the Sterling Advisory Group as partner and director of narrative strategy, where I will continue my work with heritage brands seeking to build lasting legacies." I didn't have to wait long. The first email arrived within the hour. It was from David Chin, the CEO of Northwood Textiles, a client whose family had been weaving fabrics in this region since before it was a state. "Cora, I just saw your news. This is a surprise. We were informed you were on an indefinite medical leave." When Simon's new appointee contacted us, he seemed to have no understanding of our 5-year plan. "Can you please give me a call at your convenience?" I took a deep breath and called him. The relief in his voice was palpable. "Thank God," he said. "Cora, our relationship is with you. Not with the name on the door. Our contract has a key person clause for a reason. You are our key person. If you are at Sterling, then that is where we need to be. Tell me what we need to do." By the end of the day, 3 more clients had reached out with similar sentiments. They spoke of confusing calls from junior replacements, of a sudden, jarring shift in tone from Finch and Gable, of a feeling that the steady hand they had relied upon was gone. No one was angry or dramatic. They were simply pragmatic leaders making calculated decisions to protect their businesses. They were following the trust. Of course, Simon's reaction was anything but pragmatic. My phone buzzed late that afternoon with a call from his number. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was a torrent of panicked fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Cora? You're bound by a non-solicitation agreement. This is corporate theft." I will bury you in litigation. You are finished in this industry. I listened to the message, my hand resting on the cool glass of my new office window. I looked out at the quiet garden below, where a few late roses were still in bloom. A year ago, his voice would have filled me with a paralyzing fear. Now, all I felt was a profound and weary sadness. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about contracts and legal threats. He didn't understand that his power over me, and over our clients, had been built on a foundation of respect he himself had dynamited. I forwarded the voicemail to Camila, as instructed. Her reply was swift and calm. This is predictable. Do not engage. We will handle all communications from this point forward. A shield of competence and integrity now stood between me and Simon's rage. I felt its protection, its quiet strength. I took a deep breath, turned off my phone, and went back to work, drafting a transition plan for Northwood Textiles. I was no longer reacting to Simon's chaos. I was building my own order. The following weeks unfolded like a slow, inevitable tide change. One by one, the cornerstones of the portfolio I had built at Finch and Gable began to shift. The process was quiet, professional, and entirely client-led. Camila's legal team handled the formal communications, citing key person clauses and dissatisfaction with the abrupt change in service. Each departure was a precise, surgical strike against Simon's ego, but the wounds were all self-inflicted. Then I received a call from an internal number at Finch and Gable. It was Maya Singh, a talented project manager I had mentored. Her voice was low and nervous. Cora, I shouldn't be doing this, but you need to know what's happening here, she whispered. It's chaos. Simon is in a panic. He told the board you had a breakdown and poached the accounts out of spite. He's trying to backdate project reports to cover the revenue gaps, and he's put his nephew who has zero experience in charge of your remaining accounts. He's alienating everyone. People are scared. My stomach tightened. This was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just poor leadership, it was a desperate, unethical spiral. Maya, be careful, I warned her. Don't put yourself at risk. I'm already looking for a new job, she said, her voice filled with disillusionment. This isn't the place we used to work for. He's destroying it from the inside out. I wanted you to know that none of us believe him. We know what you built. Her call was a painful reminder of the collateral damage the good people left behind to clean up the mess of a leader's failure. My fight had never been with them. Simon's voicemails grew more erratic, swinging wildly between threats of legal ruin and bizarre, pleading offers to return at triple my old salary. I stopped listening to them, simply forwarding the notifications to Camila. He was a ghost haunting a machine he no longer controlled. The climax, when it came, was not a dramatic courtroom showdown but a quiet, internal collapse. Maya called me one final time a month later. The board convened an emergency meeting, she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. An audit revealed the doctored reports. When they questioned him about the loss of 6 major accounts in as many weeks, he blamed everyone but himself. He shouted at them. It was ugly. They removed him this morning. He was escorted out of the building. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. The glass tower, the polished lobby, the man who had seen himself as a king being led away from his fallen kingdom. There was no surge of triumph, no satisfying rush of victory. There was only a hollow echo of what had been lost not just for me, but for everyone at the firm I had once called home. That evening, Nathan poured 2 glasses of wine and we sat on our small balcony, watching the lights of Port Blossom begin to twinkle across the bay. The air was cool and smelled of the coming winter. So, it's over, he said softly. Yes, I said, swirling the deep red liquid in my glass. It's over. He watched my face, his expression gentle. You don't seem happy. I don't think happy is the right word, I confessed. It's like watching a house burn down. Even if it wasn't your house anymore, you still remember what it was like to live there. You still mourn the architecture. He built that house on a rotten foundation, Cora, Nathan said, reaching for my hand. You just chose to stop holding up the walls. He was right. My departure hadn't caused the collapse, it had simply exposed the structural rot that was already there. Simon's ego was the fault line, and his own actions had triggered the earthquake. A week later, I received one last call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. Cora. It was Simon's voice, but it was a voice I had never heard before. It was stripped of all its arrogance, all its bluster. It was thin, dry, and hollowed out. They've taken everything, he said, his words barely a whisper. My reputation. It's all gone. You did this to me. I stood by the window of my new office, looking down at the garden where Edward Munro often sat to read. I felt a strange, detached calm. The urge to defend myself, to argue, was gone. You fired me with a text message while I was in a hospital bed, Simon, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You didn't value the relationships we built. You didn't value the trust our clients placed in us. You only valued your own control. Trust was the only thing holding it all together. When you broke that, everything else was bound to follow. There was a long, ragged silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his shallow breathing. For a moment, I thought he might rage again, but instead, he said something that shocked me. Maybe you're right, he muttered. Then he hung up. I never heard from him again. Months have passed. The Sterling Advisory Group is thriving. My division has grown, and I've hired Maya and 2 other talented strategists who had been adrift after the fallout at Finch and Gable. We are building something new, something grounded in the principles Edward Munro had so clearly articulated in that quiet hospital room: custodianship, respect, and the unwavering belief that relationships are the only true currency. My work is still demanding, but it no longer drains me. It nourishes me. I come home tired, but whole. Nathan says he sees a light in my eyes that had been extinguished for years. Sometimes, when I'm working late, I look out at the skyline of Port Blossom. It's the same view, the same gentle curve of the bay, but it looks different now. I see it not as a backdrop for a career, but as a home for a Lithia life I have consciously, carefully, and finally chosen for myself. The scar on my side has faded to a thin, silver line, a quiet reminder of the rupture that set me free. It taught me that sometimes, the deepest wounds are not the ones that break us, but the ones that break us open, allowing something truer and stronger to grow in their place. Simon Blackwood thought he was ending my career. He couldn't have known that he was giving me back my life. And the lesson I carry from it all is simple: our worth is not determined by the job we hold or the title on our door. It is forged in our integrity, measured by the trust we earn, and owned by no one but ourselves. Those are the things no one can ever fire you from.